I'm calling the Wednesday, June 29th, 2022 Code Review Task Force meeting to order at 5:30 p.m. The clerk will note the following members are present and absent. Members of the public may attend in person or participate online at zoom.us/join. Meeting ID 837-5342-0897. Once you log into the meeting, please use the chat feature to tell the moderator if you wish to speak to an item. More information is available in the agenda packet and on the city's website. Now on to the agenda.
Chair, can we do roll call?
Sure. Would you like to call?
Newsma.
Present.
Albrecht.
Present.
Cameron. Paul.
Present.
Jensen.
Present.
O'Brien. Neister. Roush.
Yep.
Walls. Ward.
Present.
First item tonight is the adoption of the agenda. City Clerk, does staff have any changes to the agenda?
Nothing from staff.
Do any task force members have changes? May I have a motion to adopt the agenda?
Motion.
Okay, moved. And a second?
I'll second.
Motion by Donna, seconded by Sarah to adopt the agenda. All those in favor, please say aye and raise your hand. Those opposed say nay and raise your hand.
Aye.
Motion carries. Item 2 of the agenda is approval of minutes from May 25 meeting. Does staff have any changes to the minutes?
Nothing from staff.
I did note that the roll call showed that Joshua Walls was both absent and present.
Okay.
He was here.
I think he came late, and so we had him as absent and then marked him as president.
Yes.
We can correct that.
May I have a motion to approve the minutes as amended?
I move to approve.
All right, and a second? All right, moved by Sarah, seconded by Donna. All those in favor, please say aye and raise your hand.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay, and raise your hand. The motion carries. Reviewing of outstanding items. City staff, are there any updates or outstanding items?
Thank you, Chair. I can report that the City Council did approve Title III, Chapters 2 through 19, per your recommendations on June 7th, and they also approved Title III, Chapters 20 through 22 at the June 21st meeting.
Excellent. There are no final review items tonight, so we will move to item 5. Which is questions and comments from the task force and public for Title III, Chapter 23. Submitted comments are in tonight's meeting packet. Do city attorneys or staff have anything to add? Do any task force members have further comments or questions? All right. We will move to reviewing Title III, Chapter 23. I saw that you joined us, sir, in the gallery. Are you here to speak to an item or just listening? Okay. Wanted to make sure I didn't ignore you. Thank you. Item 5 of the agenda is questions. Item 6 of the agenda is review of Title III, Chapter 23. This chapter was included in the meeting packet with staff's suggested edits. So we will go through the packet we have here. We'll do it kind of like last time, where we'll take it page by page, go through the comments and questions. Yes, Tim.
I do have one overarching question about this section here, and that is, if you go to a smoke shop here in town right now, there is a product there that falls into a very, very gray area. That's D8 joints. Does anybody know what D8 joints are, or is this totally new to you? What's that?
Delta 8?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a,
Have you guys had any?
it's got a THC of less than 3% in it, I think.
Yeah, it's,
kind of controversial in the state right now. I know.
yeah, so what they do is they synthetically take the THC-9 down to 8 and then they spray it on hemp and you can buy it anywhere. So it's really an unregulated product right now that is readily available. They do the fruit flavors, that kind of stuff. I just want to make everybody aware of it, that as we are talking about this, there is a huge different segment of a market that is kind of coming up right now that I don't really is addressing yet. I don't know if the city's ever even had complaints or even addressed it or not, but
Not that I'm aware of it.
and I think that's, as I've talked to other people, because I need teenage kids that figure this stuff out. And as I've talked around, very, very few people are actually aware of it, so I just wanted to bring it up.
Thank you. So we'll start on page 1, and a couple of comments that the section's been renamed, some definitions have been changed, and you'll notice a small edit by Godin, and a striking of the term, the phrase common, with regard to Lucy, which I had not heard before.
Maybe an old reference.
I think so.
I think.
It's what Eric Garner was killed over in New York City,
Yeah, I just haven't heard him referred to as
over Lucy.
Lucy's.
Ellen. Yeah.
So through the rest of the definitions section, on to the back side, are there any questions or comments?
I don't see it in these lists of definitions, but throughout this, sometimes it's referred to as tobacco shop and sometimes a smoke shop. Is there a difference between those two? Same,
We probably should refer to it as a tobacco shop. That's the defined term in the
okay.
preferred term. So if we identify a smoke shop reference, we probably
Right.
change it.
Okay. And then I do see a question from Shelley on tobacco shop about what is the reason for the door directly opening to the outside.
Mayor, task force members, that section and that provision derives from the similar provision in chapter 461 of state statutes that our tobacco ordinance kind of dovetails with. And it is a provision that the legislature added originally with the idea that that would allow people to observe who comes and goes more than internal access stores, and as a designed mechanism to eliminate or limit underage access to tobacco, that you couldn't sneak in through a side door or a hidden entryway. Whether it's effective or not is subject to debate, but that's the reason that was put in the state statute and is why we picked it up and have it in our city code.
Okay.
And when you see in that section, the exceptions on tobacco shops, that's also why it parallels some of the language in chapter 461. And we could possibly provide that if you want to do a cross-reference, or you can just look it up online.
Does that satisfy your question?
Yeah, it satisfies my question. I guess my issue's more with state code at this point. I mean, I just wanted to clarify that, in a mini mall situation, you could still access from the inside and have an outside door, so doesn't necessarily preclude a smoke shop being in a mini mall.
Correct.
Okay. If there's no questions on terms or definitions, let's move to 320. Oh, sorry.
Just
Steve.
one other question, just, is state statute pretty clear? Do we need all these, this is very wordy, even though it's been redacted, I'd say. There's not adequate state law that we could just reference and skinny this up significantly?
Well, we try to do that, Mr. Chair and members, when we did with the liquor issues, as you know, and then
Yeah.
people were concerned that we didn't know what liquor licenses we could actually issue for, so we put the laundry list of
Everything
license
in there.
capable establishments back in our city code. I had the fight 30 years ago with the Department of Labor and Industry, or at the time it might have been in a different agency with the building code, because the state agency required cities to administer the state building code, and then argued and forced that we would have to pass an ordinance adopting the state building code, which seemed to me to be an unnecessary second step. But I lost that battle then, and I continue to lose battles regarding just adopting matters by reference. One of the long-term city attorneys from a downtown Minneapolis firm that I highly respect, Dave Kennedy, used to argue that he could adopt an ordinance that says we will adopt the state statute by reference as well as any amendments thereto. And that last part is unclear under state law, but it certainly makes sense if you're gonna adopt something by reference when the legislature updates it. It doesn't necessarily make a lot of sense to go through the protocol of updating to reflect the 2022 statutory amendments, when you've indicated you're gonna administer the state statute, or when the legislature says you've gotta administer the state statute. So it's a very, kind of inside the game legal question. But yes, where we could do it, it's beneficial sometimes to adopt by reference.
Yeah.
But then it forces people that want to read the ordinance and understand how it works to open up the state statute and read them concurrently. And that's difficult for a lot of people to do, and particularly if you're training business people and others, having it all kind of in one spot seems to be the preferred approach from a learning or education perspective.
Kind of in the middle of page 2, I was just chuckling to myself. It says, what is it, tobacco products, cherries, Cavendish, I don't even know what that is, twist tobacco, fine cut. It's just like,
And those are listed, those are verbatim out of chapter 461, so that's a complete lift. And we could say tobacco products, tobacco-related products as defined by state law. But then that raises a question, then people would have to say, okay, as state law, is D8, Delta 8, part of that? And then you'd have to look at 461. So if you're gonna regulate it in that respects, that's kind of the policy question for task force or anybody drafting codes has to address. Do you spell it out, or you adopt by reference? On building code, for instance, the building code is so large, you don't pick it up and recopy it, you do adopt it by reference. Here, this one, though wordy, is still probably manageable to reprint it.
I think I agree with what you've done now that I understand better. If you're gonna train somebody, here it is, versus, okay, I gotta go to 4 docs, nobody's gonna do it. So, thank you, that was helpful.
Okay. Moving forward to 323-3. Is the new point B, the city shall not issue a license, is that new? I see that's been moved. I'm confused with the coloring. Is that still current
Moved
text?
and edited.
Okay,
But not added.
but not, or deleted, because I'm having a hard time distinguishing between that and the red below. Okay. So the majority of the section has been moved to different parts of it, which takes us to 323-3.1, next page. Which appears to be more moving.
Similar to other sections, we've just tried to organize it in a more understandable fashion.
Yep. And as we finish off 3, there is a question, again from Shelley, on B1, educational materials. Why is the city regulating this? Do we require training materials for liquor license applications, which are potentially more dangerous? Would the city have a comment on that?
Where are you?
B1. Yeah, right there, educational materials.
2333.
Yeah.
23.3.
33.
Yeah, I'm having trouble finding it in this document.
We can put page numbers on here.
Down on the bottom, 23.3.
If you look right above 23.4, you'll see it.
Yeah.
Um, So I believe that the training materials, is that part of the best practices program, which we don't conduct anymore? We don't have a best practices for that anymore. But the state, does the state require that?
I think so. When I was comparing other cities as well, other cities did require their educational materials be submitted.
So this is the,
We can check that.
this is the applicant submitting educational materials, or they're requesting it?
No, the applicant, if you look above you on line 6, above that in the paragraph preceding, on the initial application, the copy of the educational materials for the applicant intends to use to educate employees is to be included. They don't have to do it on renewal, but I think we're picking up ordinance provision that staff has identified as having some merit that other cities have, that then allows us to screen or see what the applicant intends to do regarding training clerks as far as their obligations, or how to read an ID to determine whether or not someone is of legal age or not.
Those educational materials are available in different forms now, too. A lot of them are online. They're actually a really good aid for not only training staff, but the consequences of poor decisions.
Yes.
I guess since this is my question, this kind of seemed to be a theme throughout this whole chapter, and I made several comments. This is a regulated substance. Obviously, alcohol is also a regulated substance and arguably more dangerous if in the hands of a minor. Definitely would require training. It seems like we're focusing more in the code on people who are selling tobacco products than we are alcohol, and I'm concerned that there is overall a bias towards people who are selling tobacco products, that we're not applying equally across the same sorts of regulated substances that pose potentially a community hazard.
Are you suggesting that tobacco in this context is overregulated, or that?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Overregulated compared to alcohol, which is also just as dangerous, definitely not approved for minors. There were a few examples, yes.
Please.
Task Force Member Ward and members, if you can remember when we were talking about the liquor licensing, right? I remember Member Nystuen brought up the point of why are we being so prescriptive on how they do their training, their education, and that was because that was in state statute. So there is specific, even more specific than what we have here, for liquor. And that was set out that we copied from state statute and is part of our best practices program.
Which I thought I just heard we don't do anymore.
For tobacco.
Tobacco. Okay, so,
We used to have one for tobacco and it was eliminated because so many of the best practices procedures were already then incorporated into statute, that it didn't make sense anymore.
so then my question is, we require these because a lot of other cities do for the training materials with regards to tobacco. It's not a current practice. Does anybody actually look at these, or is this just kind of an extra hassle that license applicants have to go through?
When I receive the applications, I do look at it. I do go through the material that they do submit.
Would you ever turn down, I mean, if it's just like, imagine it's just a Post-it note that says, we say, don't sell to minors.
Oh, that's not acceptable, no. Like, for example, for some of the renewals, some of the applicants took photos of the signage
Gotcha.
in their stores, something like that. A Post-it would not be sufficient
Okay,
at all.
okay. But then you would deny, or you would send it back to them and say, this is insufficient?
Right.
Okay,
Yep.
thank you.
I'm looking to see if there's something in statute to reference it as well.
I think to your point, Shelley, when you see items that you think are overly prescriptive, I think just continue to call them out and handle them on a case-by-case basis. Any other points or comments on that section before we move to the new 323.4, the granting or transfer of licenses? All right, moving to that. There's many questions. One is, if someone has to fill out a new application, is it really a transfer? Why not just state the licenses are not transferable? Similar to that, well, maybe we'll just start there. Why are we doing transferable licenses versus just requiring new licenses in the event of a, well, I guess this would be B, transfer.
It says it won't be allowed. Transfers?
No, it's,
Without the approval of the city clerk.
and without a new application having been filed. So to me, that just seems,
I agree.
we should edit that potentially.
So would we just say licenses may not be transferred? Would that be?
So remove transfer, in the title, we could just granting of licenses. And in here, we can reference that no transfer is not allowed.
If that's what the city
I mean, that would make sense.
Right,
doesn't
because
make
if you had a new applicant, you wouldn't just transfer it from one, they would need their own tobacco license, correct?
Perhaps this had to do with a potential buyer or change, I mean, it's not the whole license, it's the, trying to find a description
And
for
I'm
this, because
thinking
that
of-
does happen.
Yeah, I'm
It does
thinking about,
happen.
there was a time when it was very common that any store shop owner would then transfer the store to their children, upon their retirement or what have you. So that may be kind of where that transfer came from, but we're saying if you're a new applicant, it's not really a transfer. You still need to, as a new owner of the establishment, you're gonna need to file for your own application. So, yeah, we can definitely change that.
If we do make that change, I know that there's a distance restriction. So if there are locations that would be, grandfathered in today, and then they turn over the establishment to someone else, would they still get that exception? Or would that have to be approved specifically by the city manager?
I don't remember a distance.
I thought I saw one, I
I
think you're right.
3/4 mile distance.
Yeah, for tobacco shops.
All right. And for my own head, are we talking a freestanding tobacco shop, or are we talking cigarettes at Walgreens? Is that a tobacco shop?
No, that's over the counter. So like a tobacco shop is strictly tobacco
Just
products
that.
only. Yep.
Which, up until a year ago, we had none
Well, a
in the
handful.
city?
A handful.
So we have the Burn Cigar Shop, in,
There's one on
in
Nicholas.
Fishbowl.
Yeah.
It
the
seems
vape
like the
shops.
vape thing
So
has
if
made
you're-
it more visible
if-
to me anyway. I haven't,
If you predominantly sell tobacco and nicotine-related products, if that is your main product, like you could sell tobacco and then sell like cigarette papers, that kind of thing, that would be incidental to the main purpose of your shop. And if your main purpose of your shop is tobacco, then you would be considered a tobacco shop. And there's, in here somewhere, isn't it, about the definition of what is the difference between tobacco and over-the-counter?
So how do we regulate the Walgreens or the gas station differently from a shop that just sells tobacco products?
Mr. Chair, here's the difference, this is the easiest way to visualize it, is if I go into a retail tobacco store and I want to get a pack of smokes or something like that, I usually have to go to the counter and ask for it. Now, if I go to a tobacco shop, much like a liquor store, I can take the products I need off the shelf, bring it up to the counter. Does that help visualize that a little bit?
I
It's
understand the
controlled.
difference.
Okay.
I'm just I guess I just wanted to make sure that these regulations apply only to the freestanding place.
Oh, I see.
And then perhaps we don't regulate anything about, or kind of over the counter at gas stations.
Does the gas station require a license to sell cigarettes?
Yep.
Yes.
And it's under this chapter that it's licensed.
And some of the rules are the same, and then some of the rules for tobacco shops are different.
Okay,
Regarding the transfer issue, Mr. Chair, I don't think there's a different legal effect of whether you authorize a review on a transfer, just say they're not transferable. I think the end result is the same legal effect, and I don't think it affects the distance requirement issue. With the exception that if you don't renew and somebody else comes in, then the question is whether you've secured your flag in the ground or your place of business in effect. But I don't think that would change much on the transfer versus a new application.
Dan?
So, Joel, how do we treat the vape shops that we have in town? Are they considered like tobacco shops as well? Or?
Yeah, because almost all of them, Dan, have tobacco-related products to hook them, even if they didn't actually sell cigarettes, for instance. The tobacco-related product aspects would get them under this licensing regulation.
So a vape shop couldn't be next to a tobacco shop then?
Correct. That the separation requirement would click in.
With that separation, okay.
Interesting.
Yes, Sean?
So it seems like the license is tied as much to the person or more so than the establishment when you're issuing a license based on the application criteria. Is this not something where if we can say they're non-transferable, however, anything previously approved makes the establishment eligible to continue to be used for that purpose if we've previously issued a license that was an exception to the 3/4 mile rule, for example?
So, if I may, Chair, staff is proposing that we eliminate the 3/4 mile distance separation.
Okay, so
And
non-issue.
that would make the point moot if the task force agrees with that recommendation.
So maybe to skip forward just briefly, with a show of hands, are people in favor of removing the 3/4 mile? This is not a binding thing,
Yeah.
but if you're not, then we should have that conversation at length. So I would be in favor of it.
In theory, I am in favor of it.
Okay,
I just personally find the vape shops quite offensive in all their signs and their flags and their whatevers, which I assume they're following our sign ordinances, which in the past have been quite strict, and I know that they've loosened up over the years. But I'm not gonna say therefore, if we can have fewer of them by that would be a good idea, but no, I'm for not having that.
Just a little clarification on the sign issue. The city did adopt a moratorium on sign enforcement during COVID, and that has not been lifted.
Might I suggest a
One of the reasons
possibility
we're
of,
going through this process right now.
all right.
Steve?
What do the other cities around us do in this question, on this 3/4 mile?
None of them have a distance requirement.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. So generally, I'm in favor of removing it. Sounds like some of the people might be, in theory, favor of it. Could I just kind of see if you are, again, it's not binding, but if you think you might be in favor of it,
Remove them.
of removal, yep, of removal.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're split, so then we'll
Ambivalence.
have to have the conversation in depth.
I'm ambivalent, I could be convinced.
Okay. All right, well, then, I think that once we get to the distance thing, then if we have to come back and change things, we'll have to do that. Do we have consensus on, as far as B, just saying that licenses are non-transferable?
And apparently licenses are issued to people, not businesses.
Oh, corporations, individuals, sole proprietorships, LLCs, corporations, yes. So, Speedway or Holiday, they also have a tobacco license. It's not transferable. We did just have the Speedways come in and buy all the SA gas stations. Those licenses are not transferable. The Speedway did have to apply for their own tobacco license.
Okay, so then the death of a licensee is only for sole proprietor.
Well, unless
Shops.
a corporation dies, I don't know if they can.
You know, they are people.
They do sometimes have to update their operating managers and those types of things, so.
Alright.
Okay, I'm not hearing any objections to the removal of to changing B to say licenses may not be transferred. Okay, moving forward. So death of the licensee, one of the questions I had was that looks like it gives a temporary license for a period not to exceed 90 days, but we would in effect have people potentially running businesses for those 90 days who wouldn't actually qualify. And Member Ward asks, should a personal representative be identified as a representative appointed by probate proceedings or will? This is on C.
That gets to be a mess.
How does that get ahead?
So how is personal representative?
Oh, okay.
Do I just claim that I am Joe's personal representative and he died, so I get to have the business for the next 90 days?
Well, if there's a will, the personal representative would be named in the will. If there isn't a will, the personal representative could be a person that seeks that status through probate, at which point you could ask for documentation. A lot of times it probably would be a family member, and we would probably look at going through the transfer as now a new application to see if that individual meets the qualifications for the new license. You know,
Steve?
of age, et cetera, background check.
Joel, how long does probate take? Is that the 90 days or?
Months.
We had the conversation before.
So that's not, the 90
It's a-
days
it's a
isn't
huge
related to
variable.
probate.
It's not gonna.
How long does it take us to process a license?
That was the next.
Yeah, okay.
It depends. It depends on if it's filled out completely. It depends on if it needs other departments' review. It depends on if they need to make modifications to their buildings or their structures.
So let's assume that the building is fine because they're inheriting it and that they filled out the paperwork appropriately. How long would it take us generally?
About a week. If everything is submitted properly and the application and all the information is correct and I have no questions, about a week.
Okay. Chris?
Mr. Chair, and Task Force, in almost 30 years, I think I've only had one instance where this has been an issue. I mean, this is a rare case. And-
When you say it's been an issue, you mean that the person that took it over has been disqualified?
Or
Or that just no one's died in 30 years?
nobody's
That ran-
died. And,
We're probably due for it.
well, I'll knock on wood here.
You jinxed it now.
In which case, in my experience, the shop did close up until they had this all worked out.
Okay,
So it was fairly simple to handle too. And there was no action taken, it wasn't at this city, that had needed to be done.
okay.
Let him go 90 days.
So, yeah, Shelley.
I guess personal representative is a defined term legally, and we're using lowercase here. And I think that's my question overall. And I think you kind of alluded to that, Mr. Chair, with the who is the personal representative thing. Is this something that we should add a definition for, or just adopt uppercase letters and for personal representative there?
So let me ask this perhaps contrarian. Why do we allow a business to continue to operate for 90 days, even if that person hasn't been licensed?
I would
The
propose
business
that it's
previously
necessary.
had been
There's
licensed,
bills,
right.
it's been there. It's part of the community that people rely on being there. They may be in transition. There could be a variety of reasons to allow a business to continue to operate, as long as they're within the bounds of the law. And the business probably has business debts that they need to pay through the sales of the business. Would be my-
Sure. Is 90 days seem like a reasonable period?
I thought it was too short a time.
I did too.
That it may be asking a lot for a family, a personal representative, whatever, to make a decision about perhaps going forward with a business or not, or selling, or all sorts of things. Now that you could say, well, if you think you're gonna go ahead and, you know, do a new license application.
What's the cost?
$380.
$380. Okay. I wonder if, you know, if we say extend it to say 180 days, a full half year, then what's the purpose, what's the point of licensing then?
Right, you know, these are annual licenses. It's going to come around again, either be renewed with updated information. 90 days is generally, I would say, people are gonna have a plan in place. They may not be all done, but if they're informing us what's going on, they've got maybe an attorney who's going through the process on there, I don't think it's unreasonable.
And I think that whoever is dubbed as, I don't know if you would say power of attorney, next of kin, personal representative, however you want to state that, I think that within 90 days, the city would want to see some action from them that they are in the process of transferring, not transferring, of getting a new license.
Yep.
Because this, and this is only going to happen in the case of a sole proprietorship.
I would also add in there too, that a lot of these spaces are leased space, so they're gonna have agreements with their leasing agents in the event something happens.
Okay.
I can live with it.
I can live with it as well. I think they have a process in place.
And I think it's good to remember that this is more so to protect the city for somebody who's being negligent in this situation and just not wanting to do anything with it and just try to ride it out and not get their own license. This is to kind of force their hand to make them step up and take responsibility. And it's not so much as if somebody came to us and said, you know, we still have this issue with probate court. Do you know, it's going to take us an extra month. It's not like something that we would try to shut them down for. It's a matter of, you know, being reasonable and taking different situations into account.
I guess the wording, if you're saying if they're being reasonable, when it says not to exceed, I think then if you really would make an exception, if they were responsible, struggling with probate or whatever, that we should put some language that says at the discretion of the city
You can do that.
manager or clerk, whoever, so that you could,
Question. How is the city notified if that person passes away?
They monitor for bodies every day.
I'm like, you know, like, can someone just kind of float under the radar for a while and then just kind of go, oh, you know, like,
That's entirely possible.
yeah, right? So it's a matter
But
of.
I think that that's another one of the reasons why the city's put this language in there, so that the licensees know that within 3 months, we can understand the first month, maybe the second month, but within the third month, you need to contact us and let us know that something has happened and what the plan is moving forward.
That makes sense.
Mr. Chair, too, what we often have done is put language in there, if there's changes in the licensing information, they need to keep it updated. Not everybody does this, and the way I usually find out that somebody's passed on is I either send a compliance letter to them, and sending that to a dead person is not a good thing.
Right.
So that's how I find out a lot of
Sure,
things.
that makes sense, absolutely.
If we move to D, I think there is a question on it. I can't quite tell what the line is.
Yeah.
But it says premises under construction. And I'll just ask in general, why do we need this point D? I mean, generally, wouldn't we not issue a permit for a building under construction for anything?
I think, I just remember, wasn't there similar language to this in the liquor?
Yeah.
So it perhaps is just useful
Okay,
to somebody.
Kind of like an order of process, so that everything is done in place and signed off on before the license is, because if your building isn't passing, it doesn't make sense for that license to be issued if it's a new building.
Would
So
it-
that's why the order comes in that you can't get the license until you show that that building is passed.
would it be maybe
doesn't
more
run out.
clear to just say that that a license requires a occupancy certificate?
I don't pretend to know building codes, but I don't know if there could be a situation where they could have a certificate of occupancy and still not have the, official sign off of the building official. Are you aware?
Mr. Chair, I don't think there's any legal difference between how you stated it and how it's worded.
Except mine took 4 words.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're right. Josh?
Chair Body there, you can also use it like a temporary occupancy, where you're able to come in on something like that, but typically you wouldn't necessarily want to do that to be coming in under construction just based off of life safety, in case there was something that wasn't fully ready. So I think that would be a little premature. But, from a temporary certificate of occupancy is another channel.
Okay, if we don't feel strongly, then I won't belabor it. Which takes us to E, expansion of licensed premises, and then there's a question, what is the reason for the site plan?
I believe they have a requirement of a certain percentage of the building that needs to be, the building has a square footage requirement, and then only a certain percentage of the building is allowed for this or that, and the site plan ensures that they're following the code.
Okay. That'll take us to 323.5, other general licensing requirements.
We'll get to that part.
And I'll note that in B, there's been an edit around informing employees that they are required to inspect certain types of identification.
Just, I suggested moving it to where it makes more sense.
And then under D1, there's a question, do we need subsection 1 here? And I wasn't sure if that was, do we need it at all or just not at this location? I think that was from Jared.
My opinion is yes, we need it, and it's in the proper location.
Okay. Can you help me understand when we say adjacent to the licensed premises? Are we talking about off the person's property?
Usually parking lots on the property or owned by the landlord that is immediately adjacent to the licensed premises, not to abutting properties owned by somebody else,
Or just on the street?
or just on the street, correct?
Okay. What age do we look for on 2? How old do we think people need to be before we stop asking them how old they are?
Realistically, never, because you start the time when you're, well, I'm almost there, and then you get the time, hey, I'm still close to that, so you know.
But what is it for alcohol? Is it 30 as well?
It's
30 years
forever,
old.
isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I
Yeah.
would think
Ask
that
for IDs.
it's very
I have given
subjective,
my-
because you may have, a 30-year-old who looks 18.
Sure. So should we just say,
That would be
should we require them to always ask the age of all patrons? Or I personally think 30 seems a bit too close to that fuzzy line, in my opinion, but I'm not a trained clerk.
And remember, the age recently changed
Right,
from
from 18 to
18
21.
to 21, and we never changed the 30.
But does our liquor license have a similar provision that,
I'm not aware of one.
I think the liquor license is a little bit different though, because on the back of your driver's license, you're gonna have liquor restrictions that have nothing to do with your age. That people that stores are actually looking for. So theoretically, you should actually be carded every single time you go to a liquor store and/or if you go to a bar. Because I do believe that it's a state requirement that you do have to have an ID on you if you're drinking out in public or something like that. Joel can correct me if I'm wrong, but.
I'm familiar with that.
I don't want the line to slow down at Walgreens because they're looking at a bunch of driver's licenses, so.
So,
It's all
I
about
think
me.
that this is also in there to kind of help the tobacco store owner. If somebody obviously looks over 30 years old, then they don't have to ID every single person.
well, what's the point of the law if it's subjective and you can't enforce it?
I don't think we came up with
No.
this, so I'm not sure where it
This
comes
wasn't in
from.
there already, yeah.
so, funny story. So, my dad's quite old and he got carded at a liquor store and it didn't go so good. He goes, I fought in World War II and you want to see my ID? I just dropped my head and started laughing.
And the answer was yes.
I have seen some of our off-sale establishments that say you will need to show ID regardless of your age.
Yep.
Be prepared.
So should we entertain that language? Say that age verification is required?
No.
Should we raise it from 30?
No.
I think you have the age of 21, you can put it on the business owner to make sure that they're doing the right thing.
Okay.
There are
I have a question
complaints.
here too on this one. I'm glad I'm going through this with you guys. You know, and it says that, you know, you don't have to, it's not required for a person over age of 30, but if they appear to be over 30 and it turns out they're not, that's not a defense that they look like they were over 30.
Yep.
Right.
So it's kind of,
Yeah.
But it would only be against the rules if the person was under 21. You know,
Right.
We're not checking.
But it's not a justification to say, well, they looked older, so I didn't card them.
Yeah, but
there are some 18, 19-year-olds that look
Listen, my
fairly
kid's
old.
17 and he has a full
The
beard.
big beards
Yeah, well.
nowadays.
I was drinking at 17, so.
Only if you're near us.
Chris, will you cite her for that?
Just don't fight in World War
That was
Sure, years ago.
illegal in Wisconsin,
All right.
obviously.
I think we can move to 323.6 then. And on the flip side, lines 4 and 5. So these are grounds for denying the issuance of renewal of a license. And they include the applicant or license holder has outstanding fines or taxes, or they're in violation of any provisions. And Shelley said that this detailed specification of things like property taxes, et cetera, seems inconsistent with other license requirements. Would you like to elaborate on that?
Yeah, I don't recall seeing this in the liquor licensing or in massage parlor licensing or any of, it is.
It isn't, it's
exact-
consistent with other
Okay,
provisions.
then I'm
These are
wrong,
all
I'll shut up.
intended to increase
Works.
the ability to effectively enforce the ordinance provisions that we have.
Perfect.
Okay. And then on C, there's a question about where else do we mention that if we mistakenly issue a license that we will revoke it? Is that common? Not in practice, but in language, other sections? That if we accidentally, mistakenly issued the license, we will revoke it?
This was not my language, so.
Are you familiar with any other?
No, I'm not familiar with this happening, so I don't.
So is,
I'm thinking somewhere, sometimes these things are in here for a reason, because it's happened before. And maybe it has happened before, and that's why it's in here, but I'm not aware of any
Ever happening
situation
by
that
the
this
time you
has
get
ever
to-
happened. It's just that obviously, at one point, somebody got issued a license that wasn't supposed to for one reason or another, and we had to say in here, from now on, we can revoke it.
Is that, in your opinion, Joel, is that necessary to say that if we issue a license in error, that we have the right to revoke it?
Not necessary in the sense that, the only thing that might help is, but it doesn't really answer the question. The only issue would be what process you would have to follow. Would you have to go through a notice and a hearing before you revoke it, or could it be somehow revoked? And that legal question isn't answered in the language that's in front of you. So,
Do you have a recommendation, whether?
unless you put language in there, summarily revoked, subject to appeal, it doesn't necessarily need to, doesn't need to be in there, in my opinion,
Okay, so you would support removing it,
unless you added that additional language of summary revocation.
Shelley?
My thought was not that this was necessarily targeted for removal, but that it was applied to all licenses, maybe somewhere in the top of the title, so that the city has that right. Are you-
Yeah, most of our license applications will have language in there about inaccurate information, misleading information, that it can result in adverse license action, including revocation. So it's right up front. So in a way, it kind of addresses that issue before we even complete the paperwork. And they sign off on it, and agree to that. But there's always an appeal.
So I guess that would be back to attorney opinion.
Sarah?
Instead, maybe on the three, if we flip back a little bit to the 323.6, where it says, on the A part, it says grounds for denying the issuance or renewal of a license, but we don't talk about grounds for revocation right there, and maybe you just list all the other things. And then it kind of just accounts for if we accidentally issue that license, we can revoke it.
The revocation's in B.
I mean, that to me, it's in the title in 323.6 right there. It talks about the three things, but it doesn't include the revocation in that sentence in A. So maybe that would just, if you
Yeah,
just
I
add
think,
the
I
word.
think
and
that
you
B
take
probably
B.
handles C.
B is
So I would be in favor of removing C.
Oh, okay, yeah. No, you're right. In B, it does say revocation or suspension. That would be the next part.
Looks like we have a consensus in the room.
Yeah,
So
I think
let's
get
remove
rid of
C.
it. Yeah.
It's easy enough.
All right, that takes us to 323.6-1. And doesn't look like there's any comments, just it was reworded. So I'll move quickly to 323.7, compliance checks. And Shelley asked a question on B, do we do compliance checks with liquor licenses?
Yes.
Okay. Yes.
May I ask? Is that outlined in the code specifically, and do we need to do so, or can we just do compliance checks without putting that in the code that we're gonna do this?
So it does say that there will be compliance checks, but I don't think we specify that it's at least once per year in there. I think that they typically.
This one we do that because that was added to the state statute about 7 or 8 years ago that requires at least annually. Some cities were doing twice a year, and there was a debate whether or not that should be the standard or not, or whether they should just allow for selective compliance checks. And the legislature split the difference and said at least once a year.
All right.
So that's in 461 specifically.
Chris, just a question of policy. Now that the law's changed from 18 to 21, are we checking compliance checks? Are we performing them more often since the
I'll
law
leave
has
that to
changed?
Lynn.
Once a year
Just once.
is what we've typically done.
I think that COVID kind of, I think we skipped 2020.
We did skip 2020.
Okay.
I'm sorry, would the age then change to 20 instead of 17?
No, I think that that's a floor to say that we won't use 13-year-olds. That's my reading of it. If anyone disagrees with that. Because it's saying at least 17, so we're not gonna put 16-year-olds in harm's way, I guess. Metaphorically speaking. Prohibited acts, 323.8.
Morphine.
I was curious, is it lawful for a person under 21 to consume tobacco if given to them by their parent or legal guardian?
In the privacy of their own home.
I can tell you that when this section was rewritten to change it from 18 to 21, we specifically removed the language that made it the minor the criminal. So that was specifically removed.
Okay.
You're
not gonna lock up kids.
Smoking.
There was other language in here about education and those types of things for people, and so that it wouldn't be a criminal act anymore.
And so, I'm just making sure I understand B3(1), which is saying that if you're a tobacco shop that do not allow
Kids in alone.
persons under 21, then,
Self-service merchandising is allowed. That's what Chris was referring to earlier.
okay.
Distinguish between a tobacco shop and Walgreens or a gas station.
Okay.
So Walgreens, for instance, could not allow a rack to be accessible by a customer for them to put into a bin or easily shoplift.
Okay.
However, in a tobacco shop, you can do this, it's just the carve-out.
Why do we allow people under 21, even with a guardian, to go into a tobacco shop?
You do in the bars.
Because there are routinely young parents that have to take a child in with them because they're not gonna leave them in the car.
Right.
Grandparents who have
Grandparents?
their car seats.
Bar as a kid.
Can you take your kids into the park? I didn't do that growing up, I guess. All right, 323(9), tobacco shop. The following requirements shall apply to tobacco shops. A lot of comments here. From Nancy, is this section related to hookah bars or wherever people sit around and smoke together? Because it's this shall apply to tobacco shops. So does this also apply to hookah bars?
Well, yeah, because suddenly we're talking, I thought tobacco shops would just hand, would be a product that you would hand to someone. But then when it talked about seating, I thought, why would you need to sit in the store unless you're smoking?
So the statutes do allow for something they refer to as sampling of the products. And this would prohibit them from, like, selling a seat for sampling.
Oh.
Selling a seat for sampling.
It's all been tried.
There must have been a reason.
There are the sampling allowance through the state, that the state does allow. We have to be careful that it doesn't create loopholes that create unintended consequences where this type of, where you could be charging admission for people to sample in your store.
Right.
For hours or regularly, that kind of thing.
Can I ask why that's illegal? Why can't you just, why can't you charge admission for people to come in and
Because it
smoke?
conflicts with the Minnesota Indoor Clean Air Act.
Thank you. Okay. Steve asked, should we add an age requirement for employees?
I didn't see that mentioned anywhere. So you could be 16 selling cigarettes?
It's been a difficult issue with underage servers as well in liquor establishments. And
Yeah.
the state has debated that policy and basically has indicated that while there might be additional pressures, peer pressure of similar age people, they didn't want to restrict the employment of certain clerks in stores that had tobacco products or in liquor establishments to be of a higher age, so
Really?
it's been a discussion point over the years of should there be a higher limit? But on the other hand, child labor laws, there's been discussions regarding farm workers at 14 versus equipment operators, and it's a complicated policy issue, and the idea is that the essence is education, training, and the licensee being responsible for the maintenance of their business and responsible for the strength of character of the clerks that they hire to administer the law, or administer the product in conformance with the law.
Michelle?
I can, Chair and members, I can tell you that when we went through the process of updating this for the change from 18 to 21, that we did consider putting in a minimum age requirement. If we set that minimum age at 21, we did realize that that might create a hardship for convenience stores and those types of things, because they may have trouble getting employees over the age of 21 to do that work.
Thank you. There's a question on, I'm skipping A, we'll come back to A, but there's a question on E. The maximum square footage is not to exceed 2,000 square feet, or the maximum seating area is not to exceed 1/2. Why is 2,000 square feet the limit?
I don't know the answer to that.
So I'd like to suggest that we remove the upper bound and say that you can have a tobacco shop as large as you want it.
Chair, I believe that that is going to be directly tied to the building code, though, in regards to the building classification.
But that would be the building code that would handle that section, not,
It would, perhaps it's a reference, or, I see where you're going with that, perhaps you just cross it out altogether.
right,
And
let
just-
the building code
Yep.
handle the building code.
That's exactly it.
I'm happy to check with the building official and see if there's some regulation there that we need to be aware of. If it's not, we can propose it for removal.
Okay.
I mean, if they can financially make it work, if, at the size of a Target store,
I would.
give it a
Could have
whirl.
a total wine just for a total
Tobacco.
tobacco, right?
Right.
Oh, no.
Total vape.
Oh, my gosh. Can't imagine what they would find to fill it.
We're gonna have vape stores on every block.
Okay, so while Joel looks that up, let's talk about A, which is, the city has suggested that we remove the 3/4 mile minimum distance. I agree with that. Is there discussion on that item? Shelley?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think I would like to understand why that was put in place in the first place and see if the reasoning behind that has actually become antiquated.
I have some suspicions. I wasn't around when this was put in place. I do have some suspicions, and I think it was because, similarly to liquor establishments, we didn't want several bars and several tobacco shops all located in the same. Now, we can have 2 gas stations on the same corner, and they both sell tobacco products, and that's fine. But this is only for tobacco shops, right?
Why don't we let
So,
them sell alcohol
so
too?
if 2 of them wanted to be located nearer to each other, I don't see any reason why that would be a huge issue, and mostly because today's tobacco shops are specialty shops, right? We have ones that are cigar shops, ones that sell tobacco, ones that sell the vape stuff. And our ordinance right now says they can't be located next to each other. Well, they may create a synergy with each other that could be a positive thing. So that, no, look, this strip mall has a vape shop and a cigar shop. I can get both at the same place, that kind of thing. And I don't know if I couldn't think of any reason why it would be detrimental to our existing tobacco shops. So I proposed that it be looked at for removal.
Sarah?
I think also, I don't know, I'm assuming this has been in there for a long, long time, but maybe when this was in there, there was a ton of open land still, a lot of development yet to be done. And now we're at a point where there's plenty of development, there's still could be some more, and things could change, but at the same time, now it's a well-established city, and I don't think we really need that anymore, where we're trying to establish kind of a criteria for what's gonna come in and maybe a good, quality, I guess I would say, for the city at that point. Whereas now you have plenty of structures, you have spacing, and yeah, you probably could get a strip mall where you get tobacco, maybe, I suppose, and that would probably be something, but we already have gas stations across. I agree with removing it, because I think now we're more of a much more well-established community where we don't need that kind of a rule anymore.
Is anyone in favor of retaining it?
I'm not sure.
Okay,
And I'm borderline, because I have this picture in my head of this trashy little strip mall where you have nuisance activity going on. I know we've got the adjacent property stuff, but I see, okay, kids going in trying to get cigarette papers and, all the things that can happen. And so how would we prevent that sort of like a tobacco alley where inappropriate activity occurs?
well, I think that it would probably make it easier for the police to enforce if they all self-located next to each other.
How did tobacco alley?
I mean, I agree with the open, like the way that the door opens and stuff too, like that part of it with, these other things, because you see the activity going on, and if you are by each other, you're gonna see it. And there should be visibility at those doors and stuff. I don't know,
I have no objection to removing it, so I guess therefore I'm on board.
Okay, Donna, did you have a concern?
Donna's just one that my feet are stuck in concrete on any more of tobacco for that. So, guys, I would prefer to leave it simply because of the fact and I understand all the rest and I accept that, but just know where I come from that that's not changing for me.
Okay, so your objection is a moral one to tobacco.
There you go.
Okay, excellent. Well, I think then the consensus is to strike A and remove the 3/4 distance. All right. Joel, were you able to clarify on the square footage?
Not yet, Mr. Chair.
Okay, please interrupt me if you do find that. That takes us to 323.91 sampling. So maybe I was tired when I read this. I was generally confused on how this was written, whether or not sampling was allowed. I take it that it is allowed, but there's a lot of controls around it. Is that correct? Sampling is allowed?
it is.
Can I ask this question a little bit of a different way?
Please.
What exemptions does Burn get that we can go in there and smoke a cigar inside of Burn? How is that legal, and how is smoking a full cigar not sampling, and that's where my confusion came in this section.
I would have to defer to our city attorney on that one.
They should not. I mean, it should be a,
Sampling
in my
free?
opinion, sampled would not necessitate, but that the statute is vague regarding the exception for tobacco product shops that are exempted from accepted from the Clean Indoor Air Act. See if I can find a definition here.
So, is sampling explicitly permitted by state law?
Yes.
Yes.
So I'm confused why we start off the section with unless explicitly permitted by state law.
It maybe shouldn't say unless, it maybe should say except when permitted by state law, that kind of thing.
Except when
So,
permitted by state law.
You wouldn't, are you suggesting we wouldn't need to reference state law and just go ahead and put whatever prohibitions we?
it just, the section, and maybe I'm just really struggling with it, but it just seems very not clear in how it's worded.
We can look into rewording that section so it's a little clearer. I see what you're saying now that I'm looking at it the way,
So unless it's permitted, which it is, you're prohibited from permitting the sampling of any tobacco. So even though it's permitted, you can't permit it unless the state permitted it.
Which it does.
Right. So I don't know what we're
I
saying.
agree.
With the
I agree it's
guidelines of what
confusing.
this is listing.
We can reword this and try to come up with something that
Yeah.
seems a little easier.
Yes, Shelley.
I guess my general question when I read it was, are you trying to exclude every single type of sampling that isn't explicitly allowed in state law?
I'm guessing that that's where this language came from. And again, to try to tighten up any loopholes that people have in there so that they don't exploit that loophole, right? If it's not, even though it may not specifically say X, Y, Z in the statute that you're allowed to do this, it doesn't specifically say you can't. So we have to close those loopholes.
So perhaps when you come back with some proposed language,
Yeah.
any other sampling is prohibited. Okay.
We'll just, yeah, the point was just to try to keep it to what was allowed by statute and not circumvent the intent of the Minnesota Clean Indoor Air Act, right?
Makes sense.
Can you also define what sampling is versus what Burn does? I think they have humidors you rent and they're
Hey, you stop in, read the newspaper and have a cigar in there.
built.
That is
Yeah.
considered sampling.
It is. So yeah, let's get that defined.
Okay.
I don't
So
necessarily want to put Burn out of business, but
certainly clarify. Thank you.
So in that case, if I had a hookah bar and I sold you the tobacco for the hookah, you could come in and we could sit around a table and sample the hookah there? I'm not just, that's a business, it's a,
Maybe if it has a separate entrance.
And is it
but I guess what's the difference?
Joel or Chris, do you have anything?
Hope it doesn't come up.
Hope it doesn't come up. It has come up before.
Or did I just have my $1 million idea?
Well, yeah, well, you also got the Indoor Clean Air Act and the different, whether they comply with that or whether they're
Right,
just
but if you
doing.
walk in a burn, you have to keep your hat on, like, you put your hat, your hat's gonna go up in the ceiling.
Okay. Well, I'll look forward to seeing what the city suggests for next time. 32310.
So we're not gonna answer the question?
Table.
yeah, dude.
I don't need the cheese at Costco either.
Yeah, I don't. Maybe that's an action item that can be researched.
Got it down.
Okay, thank you.
See how other cities
Tim's
handle it.
Hookah business. He
And
wants
for
to
the
know.
record, with proper ventilation and for what it's worth, I'm not against it, but I just wanna make sure that we can actually do those kind
Well,
of things.
and of course, we do have some establishments that sell hookah for consumption now, like Mediterranean Cruise Cafe, and they just have their patrons use the hookah outside.
Uh-huh, gotcha.
Okay.
It's just this far from a bomb.
So 2310
I'm with you, Nancy, on that.
talks about the violations include but are not limited to, and then on 3 we see the applicant or business premises in violation of state or federal laws or laws of this code or really anything. And Shelley asks, this seems to be inconsistent application of code to the licensee. Is 3 overly broad in the city's opinion? Would they like to comment on that? Okay, we're on 32310 A3. I'm sorry.
Mr. Chairman, that's okay.
This kind of seems to be a restatement of what was in the previous section,
Yeah.
that we won't grant the application if you're in violation.
and will penalize you specifically.
And this is just saying now that we can penalize you if we find you in violation during your license period.
Okay.
I don't know if it's necessary or not, I'll let somebody else.
There's
Isn't that
provisions in, I believe, statute too, that if they have in arrears on taxes, anything like that, that we cannot issue that license. So we have prohibitions against that as well.
I have a question about that. So I want to put my smoke shop into a shopping center, but the shopping center hasn't been paying their taxes. Can I still put my smoke shop in there because the landlord, the owner of the property is in violation?
I would say if the the strip mall owner is the applicant.
Okay, so I could go in there with a smoke shop even though the mall is behind on their taxes?
I don't know.
Property
I mean, when I
owner
read this, I
versus
go,
lessee, yeah.
Yeah.
would that prevent people from going into a building to occupy it if they're behind?
Yeah, we probably have examples of that.
I'm sure we do.
Well, I don't know, I mean, it's, delinquencies for large multi-tenant buildings are quite rare, quite frankly. If they have a tax appeal and things are pending, the statute specifically allows business to continue. So I think in actuality, it is a very rare situation that you would have a tenant in a multi-tenant strip mall or other structure that we would even be confronted with the situation that the taxes are delinquent on the property. In fact, I don't know if I've seen it occur.
I haven't either, I'm just, it's a hypothetical, but.
I've seen it happen once with my former employee or employer where a business owner was in tax arrears and the direction came directly from the state, which is why we collect that information anyways. So I would say it's almost directed by the state if we need to do that.
But the business license would be issued, if the state statute provides that the business license can't be issued to the delinquent business. Here, the tenant isn't delinquent in their taxes and doesn't have any outstanding debt with the city. It's the landlord that they're renting the premises from that would be. So the state statute wouldn't be applicable. And I can't recall it occurring in the city where the city had considered not issuing a license to a tenant in a mall or multi-tenant facility. Just don't know.
Yeah, I think in our process, we don't check on it if they are leasing. We do have a copy of their lease, but we don't check on whether or not the property is, if they don't own the property. It's only when they own the property.
Okay. On 6, I see comment about, not clear where this came from. OSHA is 50 ppm and NIOSH is 35 million.
Comment.
Okay.
I don't know where these numbers came from. And I don't, I couldn't find anything that supported that.
So does it support 50 parts per million?
That may have been one of them. I believe I looked it up and I think I found two different references. I know that at one point we did do some, I think fire department might have did some background checks and did record some fairly high levels. It was kind of amazing. But I'm not entirely sure where these numbers came from.
Oh, Mr. Chair, it seems to me, I'm not having any luck finding on the 2,000 square foot provision, so I think we're gonna have to do some research of what is the origin of that section, and we can take a look at the origin of this section as well.
Okay.
Right, and I can, I think that maybe we could just eliminate the number and say consistent with OSHA and whatever and just eliminate the number,
It's gotta be safe.
just to, yeah, to,
Because they have the number already there, so, in OSHA and all that, so we don't have to necessarily.
What does NIOSH stand for? Someone know?
National Institute of Occupational occupational safety and health, I think it was.
Thank you.
Good one, Chris.
He could have just been like,
So, in kind of the whole section here, but that one in specific, do we need to mention that they have to comply with the OSHA requirements? I mean, it seems like kind of basic workplace safety stuff that's required by federal law. Is there a reason to restate it in here?
Seems
And
to me
I
that,
think it's just for the people in this situation, if they're in a situation where they are allowing sampling and the CO levels are not meeting, that they know that they need to, that there's this regulation out there because it's not listed somewhere else. Yeah, you
Right.
wouldn't know to go look for that.
But couldn't we issue them some sort of a handbook about guidelines they're supposed to follow? I mean, I don't know that it
You'd be
has to be in our
updating those
code.
handbooks quite a
Really?
bit, I think.
Educational materials.
Yeah, let's give them educational material. Let's provide the educational materials to them.
then make him give it back to us.
Yeah, exactly.
so I assume this is specific because smoking is occurring
I
Yeah.
believe so.
Yeah.
indoors.
I'm making that same assumption.
All right.
I'm
I
agreeing
had
with
no
your
idea you
assumption.
could smoke inside
I like leaving it. I
Anywhere.
think that it's a good call out.
anymore.
And, I mean, OSHA and NIOSH standards are both about occupationals, where that's not consumer oriented.
Right, well, see, workers,
Sure.
it's like servers in bars used to have to be around all day.
Yep. On 7, there's a question about, is this inconsistent for tobacco versus other license types? Around the licensee suffered or allowed
Suffered.
permitted illegal acts on the licensed premises.
No, it's similar.
Okay.
Is it similar or consistent? I mean, spoken like a true attorney.
No, it's similar. The wording may be different, but the concept or the philosophy is the same, is that the licensee is responsible for the behavior of the patrons, employees, and everybody else on the premises. And if they're not actively engaged in managing to prevent criminal activities by their employees, by themselves, or other people on the premises, their license is at risk.
Okay, so,
Because historically, it's been an excuse. I didn't know what was going on. I had no idea they were doing that over here in this corner. In spite of the fact that there's evidence they've been doing
They
it
got
in
a
that
camera
corner
on the area,
every
yeah.
Friday night for the last 10 years.
and this is where I started, and I was really bias focused that night for some reason when I read this, but I was looking at this section of code, I'm thinking, okay, Walgreens, there's a particular Walgreens in the city. Everybody knows that people are hanging out and engaging in what might be illegal activity. Oh, I'll tell you later. You just sit in the parking lot, you'll find it. And you know,
Unlock.
and I don't see this in like the business licensing for Walgreens section. And I think, okay, so they're not subjected to this specifically where somebody goes and sits and sees drugs being passed from person to person in their parking lot.
For many of them, many of our businesses do not have a business license. Massage
Okay.
therapists do, liquor licenses, liquor establishments do. But for instance, a gas station, you've seen in the paper all the gatherings and issues and shootings that have occurred in various gas station parking lots around the area, our restaurant parking lots, our bar areas. So unless they're a licensed regulated business, this type of provision doesn't necessarily apply. You have to look at public nuisance law and some other ways to get at them indirectly, because we don't have a business license provision generally across the board for all businesses within the city.
That makes sense to me now. That was where I was struggling with this whole section of the code, so, thank you.
Sarah?
Would it be possible to merge this 32310 with 323.6, since they both talk about reasons for denial, revocation, or suspension of the license? and maybe that all just gets merged into one big section, because it seems like the first part is kind of about the application process or revoking it if we find something, and now it's violations and going backwards and talking about the revoking and suspending. So it seems they're really just the same topic.
Yeah, it's before you issue the license and after you issue the
Yeah,
license,
so, like,
right?
I think at a minimum, moving it makes a lot
Makes
of
sense.
sense.
It could be moved to where they're
Sequential.
more in
All
line
just
together.
about anything you do wrong and you're out.
That makes
And I
sense.
think too, the way that I had set it up, it's consistent with how other city code
Oh, okay,
is that we had already,
sure, okay.
So
Well,
we're
and I guess
following
that's
kind of a
like-
format with other
Right.
licensing, so we're going to this section, then to
Yeah.
this section, okay.
Mhm.
Well, that makes sense then.
Yeah. I mean,
It
I'm
was
okay
just so
with either.
that
It
you
just
could go
seems-
to different licenses and know
Right.
kind of the format of each one,
Yeah.
because they're
Okay.
following a
but I'll
similar.
double check for sure.
Yeah.
Well, yeah,
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
that's fine.
yeah, I'll
It's-
double check.
It just seems like we're talking about the same thing in two different.
I agree, sometimes we do see a little redundancy with some of this.
I have a very naive question around 3, and I'm hoping to be educated. So we say that if they're in violation of any law short of the United Nations, that they're in violation for our license as a tobacco user, as a tobacco shop. And I'm just kind of wondering why, if they break a federal law and that federal law doesn't preclude them from operating a smoke shop, why the city of Burnsville cares.
I believe that federal law was added because of the congressional passage of the 21 age, and that's the reference there. I don't think it's, violation of the State Secrets Acts or anything of those types of ages. I think the intent of the drafter, and I did not draft it, so I don't know for sure why it's there, but I think it's a reference to the specific federal laws applicable to tobacco.
Okay, thank you.
I mean, I don't think we're leveraging income tax fraud unless the Department of Revenue tells us to do it.
Thank you for clarifying that. That takes us to, let's see, is there a comment? I think, Shelley, are you good with B, 10B? You had a question, okay,
Yeah, I'm good with that at this point.
thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, and I think that as we continue down the page, okay, that answers my question. What is the maximum administrative civil penalty? It says $50 is the minimum.
Actually, 50 is the penalty. You can take the minimum out.
Okay.
Can't be higher, can't be lower. It's
50,
basic. It's 50.
period.
Okay,
The licensees, the state statute in 461 is $300 for first, $600 for the second, and authority to modify it, but
and the administrative civil penalty is just $50
correct.
regardless of the occurrence.
that's correct.
Thank you. All right, any further questions on the civil penalty section?
Yeah, so it sounds like anybody under 21, we don't give them the $50 penalty. Is that, like, if you're at a liquor store and they bought liquor, we wouldn't give them a penalty either? Or is this just tobacco where we
It's
don't give
just
them a penalty?
tobacco, and it's specifically referenced in the state statute, as Mac mentioned earlier.
Okay,
The change was to focus enforcement sanctions on the licensee, go easier on the clerks that aren't trained or what have you, and not impose any penalty on the juveniles or the underage. So that matrix or that philosophical construct is in the state statute.
okay.
You mentioned juvenile, which
Interesting.
to me implies
I'm
under
sorry.
18, but do we clarify that underage just means under 21?
Yes, it's in the definition.
Thank you. Did that answer your question, Steve?
Yeah, I just thought it was interesting.
I got some laws you should read.
Okay.
Okay, and then, the last few sections have just been, moved or deleted. So that takes us to the end of this. Any final comments or questions? Okay, so Michelle has a laundry list of several items to bring back to us, a couple of investigation items and a couple of drafting items. There's no vote on it. Item 7, miscellaneous. The next code review task force meeting will be July 27th, 2022 at 5:30 PM here in the council chambers. Meetings will typically be held on the last Wednesday night of each month in 2022. Our homework is to review Title 3, Chapter 24, pawnbrokers, secondhand goods, precious metal dealers, and Chapter 25, sexually oriented businesses. These chapters are included in tonight's packet. Task force comments need to be submitted by Wednesday, July 13th. There are no additional items before us, so this meeting is adjourned. Thank you for being with us.
Good job.